Coming off of Jak II, which I absolutely loved, I was curious as how Naughty Dog could improve upon that game. Jak II did so much right, what could they do to make this next game even better? Where would the story go as a lot was wrapped up by the end of the previous game? Well, these questions will be answered by the end of Jak III, and coming back to this game years later showed me that as much as I loved it, it's not better than Jak II. Even still, this game felt like the last true Jak game in the series, even though more installments will come later on. Let's dive in and talk about Jak III in more detail. The gameplay for Jak III is almost identical to how it was in Jak II, so if you played that game then you know exactly what to expect. As I said in my Jak II review, that game only added on the foundation that Jak I had established, and the same can be said about Jak III. Even though the gameplay is the same from 2, there are different mechanics that allow this game to breathe on its own and make it stand out a bit from the second game. Most notably, the ability to use both light and dark eco powers. In Jak II, you were only able to use dark eco, but in 3, you can now use light to sort of balance out the darkness. You're granted these powers through the precursors, who have a larger role in this game than they did in the second one. Unlike the second game, I used these light powers a lot more than I did the dark ones. I think it's because the abilities were more defensive, which aligned more with my overall playstyle. I think this game did a great job at giving the player the option to use either power or both if they wanted to. If you're more of a defensive player like myself, you could use the light powers. If you like to be aggressive and on the offensive, then the dark powers are perfect for you. Regardless, you always had the option to use them or not, which was great. Speaking specifically about the light powers, I think they were really beneficial because of their specific abilities. All of them are useful, but the regeneration is by far the best. When you start taking damage, you can literally stop the gameplay and take a minute to refill your health. And what makes this even better is that the enemies drop light orbs that help charge your light meter, so you can keep spamming this over and over. This by itself makes the light powers better than the dark. Then when you add in the shield, it's obvious why I prefer the light over the dark. The powers are just more useful in combat. There's not much that has changed about the dark. It feels about the same as it did in 2. If anything, I think using the Dark Blast was more satisfying this time around because it felt like you were creating a Kamehameha. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was really fun to use, especially when you're blasting away structures with that attack. What's cool is that the entire balance of light and dark was depicted in the story and translates directly into the gameplay. You truly have to balance both sets of powers and how you use them. It was very well done. Moving on from the powers, the guns are probably my favorite aspect of the gameplay for this title. They've been expanded upon from 2 and offer so many more options when going through combat. Before, it was 4 variants on the morph gun, but now there's 3 additional variants for each type of eco on the morph gun, giving you different guns with more abilities. Again, just like 2, you have the ability to use whichever one you want, whenever you wanted. Now of course, there are drawbacks with some of these, as some aren't as powerful as others, and then some use up a lot of ammo, but you'll learn that as you progress further in the game. However, I cannot go without mentioning the best weapon in the game, the beam reflector. This weapon is absolutely broken. The entire concept of this gun is that your bullets reflect off of all the surfaces within an area, so if you shoot and miss an enemy, it will bounce off the wall and come back and hit the enemy anyway. This sounds simple on the surface, but there's a way to maximize this. If you do the jump and spin kick attack in the air while shooting the gun as well, you will unleash a bunch of these shots that will spin all over the place. So essentially, you're filling up the entire area with a slew of bullets, killing everything in your path. Combine that attack with the sheer amount of yellow ammo that drops and can be found in chests, and this game is a breeze. Once you understand how to abuse this gun, there's no reason to use any other gun for almost all the encounters in the game. It really is that strong. Now to be fair, there are other variants worth using. The Supernova for the Peacemaker is a notable one, but regardless of what you choose, these weapon variants add some much needed spice to this gameplay, making it even more fun than it already was. Of course, the melee combat is still here, but that is identical to what it always was. You still can do the same punches and kicks as before, so there really isn't anything to compare in this department. Like I said, it's when you use these attacks with the guns that things really start to open up. One could see this as a bad thing, but I think the melee combat is so good that it didn't need to be touched or fine-tuned, so I'm glad that this area of the game remained the same. The biggest feature in this game was the entire desert area and the missions that went along with it. This was completely different than in Jak II, where everything took place within the city and had you flying cars from place to place. In 3, we actually drove grounded cars and used the weapons mounted on them to complete missions. If I'm being honest, I was never the biggest fan of the desert and the missions. I liked being in the city and doing everything in there, but this was a nice change up to keep things from going stale. Driving the vehicles over the hills would get annoying at times, with you tipping over easily or your car exploding thanks to the marauders that would be chasing you was also a pain. Add in the sandstorms and time trials, and these missions were forgettable. Even though I didn't care for the desert gameplay, it fit in perfectly with the story and tone that this game was going for. With how bleak everything was, this game was more gritty and dirty than 2, and playing sections in the desert, killing metalheads in caves, and visiting temples reflected this perfectly. You do unlock different vehicles as you progress further in the game, but the Sand Shark is by far the best vehicle in the game. It's fast, efficient, and the machine guns on the vehicle kill things with ease. The other vehicles are cool, but this one takes the cake. It's useful in just about every situation and makes dealing with all the annoying stuff in the desert easier. I appreciated that there was no additional requirements to unlock these cars other than just playing the game. Yes, some of the cars you have to unlock by collecting orbs, but for the main cars there weren't any additional things that you had to do, which was nice. Since we're on the topic of the desert, I have to mention the final boss. Avoiding spoilers, but there's a first part to this where you have to shoot these eco-filled diamonds on the bottom of this giant machine, and I have no idea what the devs were smoking when they made this. This is by far the worst moment you'll have driving in the desert. This machine is absolutely massive in size, and its diamonds are located on all 3 sides of its feet, requiring you to be in the perfect spot to shoot them. And I didn't even mention the fact that it's constantly moving the whole time and can stomp on you at any second. Just a poorly designed first piece of the mission. Thankfully, the second part of the boss fight makes up for it, but still, that first part was ass. Moving on, eventually you end up making it back to Haven City and the other areas inside it. This is another issue I had with this game, as I didn't quite like the redesign of all the locations. One in particular was the Haven Forest and the area before it. I thought it was fine the way it was before, but since things are in such a war-torn state in 3, it does make sense. I just didn't vibe with it. When in the gameplay it does work, but if you play 2, you would know what I mean. All these areas were just fleshed out perfectly. The only area that I thought was done even better was the sewers. The entire place was changed both horizontally and vertically. There's a bunch of different rooms and areas that lead to other places that weren't there before. Then when you add in the theme, it makes this area one of my favorite in the entire game, which surprised me for sure. But just like Jak II, this game does a great job at having you complete these missions in a variety of locations. I think all the missions in or around the temple have to be the best in the game. I think the mission where you have to return to Haven City might be my favorite in the entire game. It's lengthy and you can just see the amount of effort that was put into this section, as it doesn't flow like the typical missions. It just feels different. Plus it ends with a boss fight, which was one of a few. The boss fights are just like 2, where you have to complete a couple of phases where the attacks change and things get a bit harder. Honestly, they're still just as easy, and as long as you're paying attention, you shouldn't die here too much. It was nice that there was more boss fights in this, as the couple that was in 2 wasn't quite enough for my liking. If I had to pick a favorite boss fight, the last one would be my favorite for sure. One of my biggest gripes with Jak II was the lack of a fast travel system, and that has been fixed to a large degree in 3. Traveling from place to place doesn't take nearly as long, and when you do, you don't need to go long distances. It's usually from the city to the desert and vice versa. However, it's still present to a degree in the desert, as you'll find yourself driving from there to Spargus and back frequently. But in comparison to 2, this was a vast improvement. So if you're worried about that being the same, don't be, because it's not. Another issue that was fixed completely was the checkpoints. The checkpoints in 3 are nowhere near as bad as they were in 2. In that game, if you died, you had to start the whole mission over. However, in 3, each time you died, you usually would start in a certain spot somewhere within that mission. You never had to go all the way back to the beginning. I think this made the game so much easier than before. Now, to be fair, I have played this game so many times that I think it's always been easy, but for a first time player, this game will be significantly easier than Jak II, which is a good thing for sure. One thing I failed to mention in 2 was the mini games, and those are still here in 3, and some were fun, while others are a bit of a chore. They kind of seem thrown in without a whole lot of thought behind it, but they're still fun. I think they were just done better in 2, but at least they were brought back in 3, so that was appreciated. I just think the mission structure for them could have been a bit better. For the most part, Jak III's gameplay improved on 2's in every aspect, but for some reason, I just think something was missing. I can't quite put my finger on it, but that's what I thought. Even still, the gameplay is very fun, and if you enjoy 2's gameplay, you're bound to enjoy this one's as well. The story in Jak III is a bit all over the place. I think in the beginning it's more concise, but as the plot slowly unravels, there's so many different things going on that it might get a bit confusing. Then what surprised me was how easy it was to predict who the true villain was. In Jak II this was a bit hidden, but in 3 this was thrown right in your face early on in the first act. I don't view this necessarily as a con, but it would have been nice to speculate a bit more on who it could be. In addition, I thought the writers nailed the tone they were going for. The entire premise is that we are in the middle of a war, and the peace that we had fought so hard for in II no longer existed. That's reflected in the story, as all of the cutscenes are gloomy and sad, as you can feel that tone through the voice acting of each character. The entire vibe of hopelessness starts right from the beginning with this story. In 2 it was a lot more mystery, but for this plot, it was just about accepting your fate and seeing if there was a chance to fix it. We were introduced to new characters and I thought they were woven into the story pretty well. I didn't always care for all of them, but they were noticeable enough for them to leave some sort of impression. Seeing the old characters interact with the new ones and reference past events really helped bring things full circle, only cementing the fact that this is indeed the third adventure and a lot has happened from Jak I. The main problem I have with this story is that there was a lot of stories sandwiched in there. It felt like this game needed another 5 hours to expand a bit more on some of the story beats that were only just established in this. It's like the writers had a whole bunch of ideas and tried to wrap everything up in one game. Because of this, there are a lot of great moments, but then some moments that had me like, okay. One thing that I did like though was the emotional connection. I thought that out of this trilogy, Jak III is by far the most emotional game. Maybe it's because of the tone, but there was more emotion portrayed in this game than the others. Especially as a kid, by the time I rolled credits, I was hit with a couple of different emotions. If there's one thing this story did, it sort of leaned into the fact that this duo has been in multiple adventures, and it ends in a way that makes you think that there could be more in the future, which there ultimately ends up being. However, it's not in the way that we would have liked. I think I speak up for everyone in saying that nobody asked for Jak X and Lost Frontier, but instead, we would have rather had a Jak IV. That's a discussion for a different video, but that's just how I felt by the end. In its entirety, the story for Jak III is cool, but it just didn't hit the same as 2 did. Even saying that, it's worth paying attention to and seeing how this initial trilogy ultimately ends. Overall, Jak III is a good game. Even with some of the minor issues I have, this is still in my top 3 for the series. I think Naughty Dog did a great job at trying to make it different from Jak II and allowed the game to stand on its own. If the story was a bit more concise and if the desert missions were done better, then this might have been the best game in the series. Even still, I love my time playing this. For those reasons, I want to give this game a 9.5. To me, Jak III is the last real Jak game. I understand that Daxter, Jak X, and Lost Frontier exist, but this just feels like the ending. It's a shame that we never got a Jak IV, but if that did happen, we might not have Uncharted or Last of Us. So at the end of the day, I guess it all worked out. Regardless, finishing this game is always bittersweet, as I know that the franchise would never get better, and to this day, we still may never get a true conclusion to this series. I definitely recommend this game if you have never played it, because it's worth the money for sure. What did you think about Jak III? Did you play this before, or are you hearing about this for the first time? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.